folks would be shocked if they saw the kind of conversation and the engagement that the undergrads are having here. Thursday nights on a college campus on March Madness weekend is amazing to be able to pack a room. So that is like a testament to how dope all of you are and dope Brian is and Dr. Sims is pulling this stuff together. So this year we're dealing with almost like a season of the changing of the guard and custodians. There have been a number of significant elders that we've lost. Most folks are more familiar with Nelson Mandela and his death. Other folks may be more familiar with Amiri Baraka, activist extraordinaire, and his recent loss. And then other people may be also thinking about a very even more recent Nana Chokwe Lumumba. So folks who've been elders and working in the movements for Black Power across the globe, right? Like Nelson Mandela's in Tanzania in South Africa. And then locally, of course, Chokwe Lumumba in Mississippi, and then Amiri Baraka in, you could say Newark, but then across the globe. A number of these elders get extreme recognition, and that's good. But there's some folks that we haven't paid as much attention to. And Tata K.K. Bunseki Fu-Kiau is one of those people. So what I would like to do is not move fast through this presentation, but actually slow down and talk to you in the ways that Tata Fu-Kiau actually taught us in the 5 or 6 workshops I was able to attend, and the videos I watched, and then reading his books. So you're not going to get as much of Dr. Haight today because I want to honor this elder. And it's a lot of stuff that I would like to say about what's currently happening in the Congo, but that would again take away from what we're going to hear with Tata Fu-Kiau and get to think about. Because what he is an initiate into an African system. Now when I say an African system, I mean a way of understanding life in its totality. So understanding the cosmos and humanity's relationship to it, understanding cosmos in relation to itself, its beginnings, how it evolves, and then using that to map on to humanity, how African people evolve in our own developmental life stages. I also want to introduce some concepts of language, because one of the most important things we can do here is engage in the study of African languages. As we can think about Europeans in general, they are a dying group. The only way they are able to maintain their existence is through the people who have life. And so European languages should be dying out. European physical traits should be dying out. And if we're not careful, we will watch the death and extinction of one group almost by, the Charles Darwinian idea of, natural selection, survival of the fittest. Okay, cool. So if this group is dying out, then what for us, and what will remain in that process of us staying alive, maintaining our cultures and traditions and worldview? K.K. Bunseki Fu-Kiau is one of the folks who actually engaged in studying KiKongo traditions and then creating schools to be a repository for all of those traditions. Now, the reason why I mention that is a lot of elders will say that younger folks don't listen to the elders, and I always wonder, sometimes it takes the elders a long time to get to the point. And then I start thinking, well, maybe you don't have a damn point. You have your life experiences which may have worked for you, but they may not work in this current setting and time space that we're in. That doesn't make invaluable their experiences for them. It just may mean that the experiences that they had are more consistent with their generation's experience. So when Fanon comes along and says, each generation must rise up out of relative opacity and then define its generational mission and fulfill it or betray it, it's really saying that there's no generational continuity. that each generation isn't passing on intergenerationally those things which are sustaining for life. That's true in the colonized European Western existence, not true for indigenous African existence. And so when I think about what the elders are actually able to pass on, I recognize very quickly they haven't figured out anything that is substantive beyond the existence of European encroachment upon African territories and peoples and languages and cultures. And if they are, they should be retaining those examples and then making sure that we understand them. So my coming across Tata K.K. was immediately a recognition that this is a man who represents an entire culture and is taken upon his shoulders to maintain, preserve, and then transmit this culture as possible. In a very non-cultural way of sitting in workshops like this versus being in the moment of nature and society and community, or the Boko, and then transmitting these life-sustaining principles and properties as you are immersed in them, right? So I want you to try to imagine your place, your space, and where you see Tata K.K. right now. And if you notice immediately in the background there is greenery, right? So he would travel to places and then just teach us about plants, teach us about how nature exists, and then how African folks have always understood it. Okay? So we'll introduce some of those concepts, but the first thing we'll do is just kind of contextualize who the KiKongo people are. I want to get to, all right, cool. So if we look here at this map, there is from about 3,000 quote unquote BCE to about 1,000, 1,500 current time, migrations across the continent of Africa. And these are some of the Bantu migrations, and they happen in multiple ways. So a lot of people have these ideas that African people just got snatched up out of the continent, and that anywhere that they were just snatched and then brought to the West, right? We'll look at those movements, but the migrations within Africa are extremely important because you have some groups that are actually traveling across the continent, some groups that are traveling down the continent. So here you have the Bantu, where their homeland is where we consider like Niger-Congo, part of the Niger-Congo language family group. And they move initially to the south of Africa. And then they move also across to the east of Africa. So you can follow their different migration and travel routes, and when they leave, they're bringing with them their own culture. So some of their cultures are more based on rivers, and then river-life civilizations. Some of the cultures are more based on agrarian traditions, growing crops. Okay? Now, in those positions, you begin to understand certain relationships to the earth, and then respecting the earth as a source of life. And then we'll get specifically into that a little bit later. But so I just want to show you some of these migrations, because next piece we're going to look at, we'll go back a slide and look at the actual migrations out of Africa, right? So this is where you see Bantu culture spreading throughout Africa, and then we'll look at where you see Bantu culture spreading throughout the Western world, and then some of the Eastern world. So briefly, anytime I present, I try to use some of these slides that are from transatlantic voyages, and if we need to dim the lights at some point, we will for contrast. But you see that most folks that came from the continent are actually coming from Central Africa, like Angola, or Gola, and the Congo region, and then moving out towards Brazil, South America, also moving into the Caribbean. And if we follow these places, Bantu are just one of the groups that we would see the remnants left over from, and then still being practiced today. I don't want us to think of Africa as yesterday. Anytime you hear presenters talk about what African people used to do, as if they don't still do that, you're finding folks stuck in an anthropological framework that doesn't really exist with the current lived tradition of African people, right? Okay, so 40 to 50 something% of the people who were taken from the continent are actually affiliated with this Bantu culture. Now keep in mind, I'm not saying that everybody was Bantu in bloodlines, but I'm saying that the Bantu culture represents about 40 to 50% of those that were taken. Okay, and you can hear it in modern day places. And we'll look at one of these modern day places real briefly. Anybody know what this is an image of? It's real hot up in New Orleans. Place where Africans used to gather. Congo Square. Now,
say it again.
Congo Square in New Orleans, right? This is one of those places where we see direct language traditions. I don't want to just say remnants, but like traditions in language, because you get the name Congo, right? So that's one aspect of where you see the Congolese and the KiKongo traditions, actually Congolese traditions coming out of it. But the second piece is you see them in a circle in the way that they're actually dancing, where they're touching hands, right? So if we were to look in some of the other places throughout Latin and South America, we would actually see some of these same types of dances that actually have KiKongo or Congolese origins. Name some famous Spanish dances that the quote-unquote Spanish people do. Salsa, merengue, what else? Bachata, good. Tango, right? Good. So, with the word like tango, that actually is a KiKongo word that means to count. And whenever you watch white people dance, they count like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, turn this, got all these directions. But there's a relationship between the man and the woman that happens throughout the dance that establishes the rhythm, but also brings you the harmony between male-female forces. Now there are some other dances where folks would be real tight together. So if anybody's ever been in any Spanish dances, you recognize that folks dance almost belly to belly. Now why would the bellies be important in dance? Say it again?
Spirit to spirit.
Spirit to spirit.
For women, it's where life is created.
Good. So it's where life is created, right? So in these dances, they're actually reproductive health movements to rhythm that reestablish the relationship of man and woman to each other, right? But Europeans get it and they're like, all right, this is lambada, and this is all of these other different names for it that are all Congolese, but then they take on different interpretations of it, right? So Congo Square is like one of these places where we would see this cipher or this piece that we'll talk about in terms of the Nkanga and what that actually looks like in deep thought. Because what you have here is not just a man and woman dancing. You got a number of folks. If you see the sisters, what do you see on the sister's head? Look at the sister's head if you can see. What do you see? You see head wraps. Now the head wraps aren't just to protect the hair from the sun. The head wraps are actually signs of spiritual relationship to a spiritual tradition, right? So we think like, all right, this is just style. You might see Erykah Badu wrapped up with some fake rock braids, whatever, and you're like, all right, this is whatever. But no, these are actual signs and symbols that if we decode them using an African understanding of the KiKongo culture or Congolese culture in general, you recognize this is one group that uses head wraps as a sign of belonging to a spiritual tradition. All right, so let's go forward then. This is just another map in case it wasn't clear about where you find the Bantu people. So the key piece here is folks might want to limit just Bantu themselves to one region, and it's not that simple. Like within Africa, you have multiple migrations happening over tens of thousands of years. We're just talking about the last 4,000 years. Okay. So, in talking about language itself, you can find the worldview in ways that the language doesn't translate directly, but we're going to try to approximate it using English language terms. So I want to just do a call and response, which is actually the way Tata K.K. worked with us. Okay, and I'm also looking at the time, and we are not even close to being where we're supposed to be. All right, so let me just start moving on this piece, right? Now, first word, I'm going to say salasana, and then I'm going to say what it means, and then you say what it means. So salasana,
Salasana,
to help each other.
to help each other.
Tunyasana,
Tunyasana,
To build each other.
To build each other.
Longa sana.
Longa sana.
To teach each other.
To teach each other.
Vora sana.
Vora sana.
To speak to each other.
To speak to each other.
And Zaya sana.
Zaya sana.
To know each other.
To know each other.
Now, this is the beginning of teaching KiKongo language that he started with and talking about health. That there are social relationships that we have to maintain, and that sana is actually obviously then each other, right? Brikasana.
Brikasana.
To heal each other.
To heal each other.
Tondasana.
Tondasana.
To thank each other.
To thank each other.
Natusana.
Natusana.
To carry each other.
To carry each other.
Zitasana.
Zitasana.
Respect each other.
Respect each other.
That's literally like Fight Club, right? So when you say like respect the fight, you're saying Zitasana. Zolasana.
Zolasana.
To love each other.
To love each other.
And Rembasana.
Rembasana.
Making love to each other.
Making love to each other.
Okay, now, I want to identify on this last point, Tata K.K would share that when two people make love, they've signed a contract with each other and have a relationship that lasts perpetually. Not necessarily saying that there is something that one person gave the other, but that they are connected perpetually. Right? So you don't just throw away the people that you make love to, you actually have a contract with them. And in making that contract with them, you've said that I am allowing your life force and my life force to connect. And that there will always be this lasting connection from these life forces. Okay? The second piece is he would talk about the process of creating humanity and then move into the image that is here. But the birth of an individual is seen as the rising of a sun from Ku Mpemba into Nseke. So, Dr. Ichile yesterday was talking about this idea of Kalunga. Kalunga is this horizontal line that you see between Nseke and Ku Mpemba. In some ways, it's seen as this radiating wave of ocean water. But it's not just the ocean itself. It's a spiritual line that demarks the relationship between spirits and the living. Now, before I go further with that, there's also this vertical line, that is Telema. The horizontal line is your physical existence. The vertical line is your spiritual existence. So that as you rise up from Ku Mpemba to Nseke, you're taking manifestation from the spirit world into the physical world, but bringing with you your access to spirit as an individual. You'll notice the 4 points or the 4 circles, these are different positions of a star. So the first one is Musoni. Musoni, as Tata K.K explained, was that God inscribes existence with a fire pen. Right? So that into each existing animate object, animate being, life is inscribed with a fire pen. That's just conception. Then you move to the stage of birth, which is Kala. Now this Kala piece is beautiful because it is what color? Black. And we could have all kinds of discussions about melanin that will actually follow up with the Dr. Moore's presentation. We could also look into some of the Indian traditions and say that Kala is a god of destruction, but destruction so that life can exist. Right? Okay, cool. Then you move from Kala into Kula, and this is the human at their highest point. This is the point where you're a leader. And if we were to draw a line from the red to the black, at like that top portion, you would actually see like the human being standing in what would be like an Ankh position. This is about a Ken Nunn talked about it last week at ASCAP. Right? So if you've ever seen an Ankh, it's actually a human being standing in their rightful position in a V. Hold off on that for a second. They move from Tukula to Luvemba. Now, Luvemba is described as the accumulation of poisons, the accumulation of toxins that brings about what? Death. So in the life cycle, it's a fascinating piece here, because if you think about the amount of toxins that you consume, you're actually preparing the body for death. Or the number of toxins that you're exposed to in the environment, the number of toxins that are passed on within your DNA, all of these predispositions to accumulating toxins and then activating those toxins brings about the death portion. Or, in other ways, if you ever watch charcoal, it goes from being black, you light it up, it gets what color?
White.
No, you light it up, it gets what color? It turns red because it's burning now. And then when it's about to go out, what happens to it? It turns white, ashen, right? Cool. Now, in the human life cycle, you move from November to Usoni. As you become an ancestor, you rise again, or you lower the sun from Ku Nseke to Ku Mpemba. So you literally cross over the Kalunda line again. In that process, you go back into the spirit world as a spirit, but you don't necessarily become an ancestor. Why might you not necessarily become an ancestor? Because in your position at Tukula, you were supposed to be a leader. And so if you failed at your traditions in leadership, the community goes through a process which is called Kotuswa mu Bukulu. And the community decides if you're an ancestor that should be elevated to a balanced ancestor, or one whose spirit they're going to call upon and pour for, give libations to, re-energize in the living world so that you can draw upon their spiritual energy. And that is literally a community process where he would say that the community comes together and talks about a few things. One, who did he owe money to? Who did she owe money to? Two, what debts that are social have not been paid? And then three, what were the actions and behavior of this elder who's become an ancestor, and should we consider them a good ancestor? They can also become a bad ancestor or just forgotten altogether. And the reason for that is you never want to call back bad energies from the spirit world. You never want to replicate bad spirit. Right? So that community process then says, well, you had responsibilities and social obligations to the community that you either engaged in or you didn't. And if you betrayed your generational mission or betrayed your spiritual mission on earth, then we are not going to call you back in ancestry. Everybody with that for a second? Okay, good. Because there's a purpose to calling the ancestors. It's not just you just name ancestors randomly. Ancestors had engaged, had behaviors or activities or things that they did in life that you want to recall in the spirit world. So you're very specific about what you recall. Not just everybody for everybody's sake, but what do you want? Because when you call the ancestors, some folks have seen this in different places within the U.S., they'll come. And they'll ask you, what do you want? And you might be like, I just got to pay for this student loan right quick. And they be looking at me like, you know what kind of energy I got access to? God's writing my essence to the spiritual with a fire pen, and you want to talk about paying loans? What do you actually want to happen? All right? Okay. Next piece we'll just look at real quickly. I keep lying. I told you I want to take this slow because Tata K.K would really slowly with us, right? And he would say, you got to say powerful words powerfully multiple times. And it's actually an art called Kinzoni, and that is the practice of good speech in administration, judicial affairs, resolving community conflicts, and being part of the specialist community within KiKongo society. So if you see, there are like these lines that radiate out from the center, each of these lines represents a level of sensitivity to spirit. So the closer that you are, you're here at the center of spirit, right? And so when you see here, it's just a circle or deity. And that deity is a protective place for each individual to be perfectly balanced in their center. So that each person should be centered within the community. Now the challenge here is we don't have community because we don't have place where our ancestors are buried, where we have planted, where we have grown our own family members into communities over several thousands of years. So I'm not trying to tie us into the U.S. and think about, well, we have these communities the same way we do in the continent. We don't have like people who identify with this common language, common history, common peoplehood, shared relationships, understanding how each gender, male and female, goes through their process of becoming an adult. We got people who live together, subjected to the whims of white supremacy that can be moved, relocated, disrupted, and uprooted at any given time. So your strength is within the center, and each way that it moves out brings different levels of insensitivity. So if you ever feel like I am way off my path, you will recognize very quickly that you are not centered. Or you're disconnected from the forces that protect you. Right? So in our ideal states, communities that have surrounded children will be able to make sure that these children are safe, because they'll be in the most radiated place within our communities. The further the children are taken out of the center of our communities, the more likely they are to be exposed to the madness of the outside. So the idea there is, within that deity or center or circle, you have all of your protective forces inside. It is up to us to keep those protective forces safe, because once we open that up, all of the toxic forces come in, and then all of the protective forces go out. Now, let's just look at this at like hip-hop for a second, right? Okay. Hip-hop, we could say, is conceived in Musoni, and the original people that then produce hip-hop at its birth are what? What do they look like? Who produces hip-hop? Black people, right? Now we're already uncomfortable with it because you can see where this is going. So you know that hip-hop is dying when it's at what position and who is seen in the lead of rap music. Now, you could say that hip-hop in its rap form could be the accumulation of toxic forces that haven't been protected within the center or the deity. Very easily, right? And if you look at it, it almost looks like a damn record. And that it's spinning around, and it's supposed to come back to Musoni. Now, if we were DJs, we would say, let's just cut up at Chicago, right? But somehow we spun, and who was the white person that beat Kendrick Lamar for Rap Artist of the Year? November, right? People would have these conversations about, Eminem being the best MC alive, one of the most incredible lyricists. And at that point, what are we saying we're accepting? Literally the death of the correct birth and strength of hip-hop, or the death of black presence in hip-hop. And then just think about Eminem's lyrics that are anti-African, attacking motherhood, attacking children, like attacking the beating of black women, or promoting the beating of black women. In any way possible, you could look at Eminem as November. And then you could say, this is some of the best poison that I've ever heard. And that would be realistic. You could say, this is some of the strongest poison, right? So you could be like, all right, this is the cocktail that they use in the death penalty process when they're going to kill somebody on death row. Those toxins are meant to do what? Bring about death. So you have a cocktail of November. So when I listen to Eminem, or I listen to a Macklemore, or I ask my 8-year-old cousin, like, who do you like in hip hop? And she says, I like Ryan Lewis. And I'm like, who the hell is that? He raps with Macklemore. And I'm like, what the F is that, right? Okay, so you could see how you could apply this model to many different ways. The other way that Charles Finch, brilliant thinker, talked about it was literally the birth and death of suns. So you see the sun in its yellow position, lasting, right? Goes through black holes, red giants, white dwarfs. So now, we have the energy and power of black holes, but when we act like Europeans, we are literally trying to be what? White dwarfs. It's an amazing process every time you look at this thing. Now, Fu-Kiau wasn't breaking it down like this. I'm saying if you apply this to any position in life, you will see it very quickly. All right. Some ideas of self-healing, Kukini Akisa. So healing is the process of regenerating body energy or in gold. I need Brian in here to tell me what our time is going to be like, because I don't want to take up too much Dr. Moore's time. No, we got Dr. Moore next, and I'm not playing with that. I want to see that, right? Okay, cool. So, there is medicine, so I'm saying Muinkisi, you say Muinkisi, Muinkisi.
Muinkisi.
Ceremonies and rituals, Muinkinzi.
Muinkinzi.
Words or spoken medicine, Mumambu Mpova.
Mumambu Mpova.
And then incantations and demands, Mu Ndombolo.
Mu Ndombolo.
Nansumbuduru.
Nansumbunda.
Let me say that again. Sambuduru.
Sambudulu.
Okay, good. So, if we think about medicine, you may have seen these like little bags of medicine that people would carry around with them. They may tie them on their arms, they may hang them around their neck, they may put them around their ankles, they may wear them around their waist. But this idea that you are always re-energizing the body with medicine, right? So so think about this now. You ever see the belts that people rock and they got these skull and crossbones? That's deep because the belt itself is supposed to be like in the martial traditions, ancient martial tradition. The belt represents like tying the knot of connecting the lower and upper world. So it means that this person has attained mastery by doing what? Making the line between the lower and the upper world be the place where they actually stand so they can connect the upper and lower world. And that is the tying of that knot in belt traditions or the cords in capoeira, whatever you might see, right? Cool. Now what does that mean then if you're tying the skull and crossbones around your damn belt, around your waist? Anyway, let's keep moving here. So, words or spoken medicine, the Mambu and Pova. If you think about the way that we speak to each other, are we speaking poison to each other or re-poisoning other people? Or are we speaking medicine to each other? And it becomes a very different conversation if we just talk about language and words as medicine or poison and just make that dichotomy. Think, are we poisoning each other or giving medicine to each other? And then incantations, demands. We'll look at one at the end of this presentation and I'll move to wrap up in a second. That the way that we pray or the things that we wish for or the things that we complain about become our incantations and demands, right? So you may recognize that there are times where you are in your flow and you are centered and you're like, I need this to happen, and this to happen. I give you an example. So I got married recently. And I always imagined like when I got married that I would have this one DJ who spins Stevie Wonder music all night. And he is the best DJ that I've ever been to, best DJ I've ever heard spin at a party, right? Like one of them DJs that you're like, okay, I can go to this party all the time. So I used to drive from DC to New York, right? I'd leave 8 o'clock, get there 12, party to 6, drive back home. And that doesn't sound like people should be doing that kind of stuff because you should be tired, right? But you ever walk out of the party and you feel so energized, you're like, I don't want this to end. And the sunrise just says it's time for day to begin, so you go around your original routines. So, got married, we didn't have the DJ for our reception, but it just so happened that a week later, we get back from our honeymoon, or honey sun, and we get into DC, and there is this DJ is spinning the party in DC. So I'm like, cool. I told you he spins what music? Stevie Wonder, good. Stevie Wonder shows up to the party and performs 3 sets. You know how much them tickets were? $15. You know how much Stevie Wonder concert tickets cost? More than $15, right? So I'm sitting there, and there are about 50 people in the room because who goes to a Stevie Wonder party in DC, right? Why? Because what music reigns right now? November music. So you don't think of collar music. And as soon as I hear Stevie Wonder, it's like literally a renewal of the energy. And there is nothing like hearing Az with him DJ. It's crazy. Stevie Wonder's freestyling, right? I'm thinking, like literally making up songs on the spot. And I'm thinking, this is such a beautiful flow. Got to figure out how to call these energies or make those incantations and demands on a more consistent basis. But the worst part of white supremacy, besides everything, is that it puts into our minds doubt. And so we don't think of ourselves as capable of bringing into existence those things which we petition. Right? Now, we could say it was chance. Who's my sister? We could say it was chance, right? What it couldn't have been, it was change. And what changed in it, it was the incantation domain. Anyway, so in this idea of health being strength, I'm going to try and wrap up real quickly because, again, we had about an hour for this session. I think we're moving. You said I got 50 minutes? You saying high?
No, 5 minutes.
5. I drove, anyway, so. These are some of the strongest men I've been around, right? These are all masters in the martial arts traditions and other stuff. And I say other stuff because to master martial arts, you have to master the spiritual arts. And literally, African people might have taught Europeans how to do movements, like in capoeira, but in the righteous societies, it never initiated them into the spiritual societies. Right? So you can read a book by this brother named Desh Obi. And he talks about the fighting traditions in the Carolinas, in the lower Atlantic, the U.S., and then in other spaces. And in that, he would talk about this idea of the transmission of the cultural and spiritual arts through this physical self-defense, which brought about self-determination. If you want to catch interviews with some of these folks, we got an ongoing project of like interviewing the warriors. Check our mixwithilike.com. It's a 2-hour plus interview with our brother in the middle of Hati Kalini
Org.
I mixwithilike.org, excuse me. And then, you know, a number of these folks have different books, but it's not just like karate. That's another story, right? But it's literally like folks who've been trying to find the African approach to self-defense. All right. Let me, and then these are some of the folks in their action, and I just want to point out in this lower left piece here, this is Muhammad Ali crossing the Kalunga line saying, I'm going to train underwater. Now, if you know Muhammad Ali for anything, you know he's famous as a boxer for his deceptiveness. And then his ability to do things that just looked like they weren't supposed to happen. So people would say there's a phantom punch, came out of nowhere, he knocked somebody out. Muhammad Ali is one, if you listen to him, he's actually making demands and petitioning incantations all the time. And so people would be like, I don't like the sound of his voice, but he's actually praying the fight to go the way that he demanded. And in the warrior tradition, it would say that the fight happens before you actually step into the physical space. Right? And I've seen this in Sengelase spaces where there are these wrestling matches where folks are like they'll carry a pot that's supposed to be everything that represents their enemy or their opponent on top of their heads. And they go through this dope dance ritual before the fight. Fight can last 10 seconds, but the ritual before the fight could take hours, overnight. And then before they get into the fight, they actually take the pot off their head and they smash it. And that's like, I smashed my enemy. So when we think we're going through these archaeological, anthropological finds and we're finding this pottery, and you're like, oh, this represents this group, or this represents this group, I keep looking at it like, you don't know what that pot represents. It might represent the destroyed remnants of the enemies that these Africans fought, maybe against each other, maybe the death of the Europeans, maybe reminders to us that we are supposed to find the shattered fragments of the European pot amongst ourselves when we destroy it. So take that European off your head and smash that piece, right? Okay. I want to bring out one last piece. I keep saying that. I'm lying. Alright, let me do this last piece, right? So, we talk Yoruba traditions, and we talk Akan traditions in the U.S., and then there are other groups that might be like Palo Monte, Palo Mayombe, and we find these traditions like in multiple places where Africans exist, in very strong traditions, right? But Tata K.K would also suggest that we have ways of understanding ancient Kemet that the Europeans can't do because they don't understand the current custodians of ancestral knowledge. So if you don't understand the current existence of this knowledge, you can't get access to that ancient knowledge. So one of these we can see in this idea of this concept he gave us called Simba Simbi. Now, Danny Dawson said that Simbi is a twice-born ancestor. Somebody that just came back from the ancestral world or the spirit world with knowledge. Another way of looking at it is Simba Simbi translates to like hold up that which holds you up. So it means raise up the traditions that raise you up. Right? Okay, cool. Now, this image here is the relationship and the Kemetic cosmology between the heavens, humanity, and then the earth. So the earth is represented by Geb. You see him doing some like yoga positions. Geb is on the lower part here. In the middle you have Shu. It's holding up this Ka position. And then above that you have Nut, who is like representing the heavens. And then you see the heavens looking down at humanity. Geb is connecting to the earth. And then Shu is holding up the space between heaven and earth. Or, if you put a Dekenga in your mind and circle it, this is literally Shu standing in the leadership position, holding up the Ka, or engaging in the Simba Simbi, holding up that which holds you up, right? Cool, so, we can see it if we just look specifically at what he writes. So he writes, Nsungia Amuvula. The rainy season is fundamentally a season of cleansing, vitality, and growth. It is the season in which the sky looks down while the earth raises its arms. Right? So the earth raises its arms to receive the blessings from above. The sky is looking downward. Alright, and then, Alright, cool. Let me stop there and just recognize that we do this stuff all the time. Right? Anybody ever watch Good Times? This classic image was painting from Ernie Barnes. And we see all of these different ways that African folks engage in dynamic movement. And when the party is that live, folks are just throwing their hands up, right? Literally, folks used to say, like, raise the roof, which is deep, because it's like raise the roof to the heavens, hold up that which holds you up. And then in another place, I got pictures of folks at that Stevie Wonder party where certain songs come on and everybody's hands just go up. Right? Okay. Let me stop there. I think that's my 5 minutes, right? I don't want to get fight for a dollar. But thank you all very much for your attention.